example, do we spend our money on within academic affairs? What areas? That's got to come out of a faculty curriculum and planning committee. Within student affairs, I mean, I think that it's absolutely right that each senior administrator work very broadly with both all constituents and the people involved in saying, how could we best make use of our resources, what we have, in order to fulfill our mission, our part of it. But at this point, for this, I don't see it. And I think we also, as we go forward, have to distinguish between voice, vote, and veto. We try to maximize voice as best we can. There are probably some areas, but very few, where an element has a veto of something, and some where a vote is appropriate but not important. But I want to have us all to have a vocabulary to try to be clear about which one's appropriate in each area. Yeah, please.
As a student here, one of the things you're going to dance around is that creating Hampshire College, Hampshire University. And I know there's much more pressing issues at the time given the budget, but it's kind of worrisome for me. So I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit.
Sure, and I have to tell you that and I don't want to suggest it is not serious, but in that vision, the vision statement is intended to put out some possible futures, and I will at least say that was a might. I'll tell you, I've shared with some people that concern about what that might mean, and particularly the fact is, what does it mean for us to do graduate degrees? I come from universities, and one of the things that I've seen that's so important for Hampshire and the core education is the fact that our students work with our faculty much more in the model of graduate students. And I've said to some people who've been pressing me, but shall we say suggesting this, I said, my concern is precisely that if there are also graduate students here, faculty, as I've observed this elsewhere, would tend to spend more of their advising time with them and not with the undergraduates. So you may have other concerns. I have that great concern. One of the things that we're thinking of is, well, would that necessarily be the case if you offered a low residency program where the only time that this group of graduate students were around was in the summer or something like that? So it's very much what should I say, a thought. Should we consider this? What would it mean? But absolutely, one of the things is this is not a prescription. This is not a course that we're on. That was just an idea to consider what it would mean to have some graduate programs. Would it mean that we were a university? Yeah.
Ralph, this is something of a follow-up question, and it concerns the size of the place. Something I was reflecting on while you were speaking, and then at the end you envisioned a school of perhaps 1,800 to 2,000 students. We've almost never talked about the size of the place except as a function of a given budget, and then it's kind of a Goldilocks analysis, too small, too large. On the other hand, there's been in the air recently the idea that for a school, liberal arts college, maybe 2,000 is an optimal figure for scales of economy or other reasons. And so I wonder, a jump to a university strikes me as a whole other discussion, but size is maybe something we could get our hands around, since if we have a strategic plan that imagines our growing, that would put into context all the questions that Lorna was raising earlier, quite differently from if we're worried about shrinking to 900 when we have to lay off everyone to stay alive like that. So how does size and a target of an optimal size in particular come into play at all?
Great question. 2,000 is a number I too have heard. I've heard some people say actually larger. Morty Shapiro, who's the former president of Williams, economist, says it might be actually 4,000. I have a couple things. First of all, in that vision, and this is yet another area where it's not a plan, it's a vision. someone very close to me asked me after he read it, what were you ingesting? He used other words. But, however, on the size issue, first of all, when I said that number, 1,800 to 2,000, I wasn't necessarily thinking that all of them would be resident undergraduates engaged in precisely the program that we have now. There might be some of those tracks involving non-resident. But as to the question, I think that's something we do need to consider, and it's part of our strategic plan. I mean, I think that what this past year has taught us is that if we're going to think of growing to that number one way or another, we have to negotiate the eye of the needle of the next year, which might see a contraction, even if it's, we'd have to see how that evolved, but we have to be very clear how we would get on a track to reverse that. I have been talking a lot with the 5 college people, and we're continuing an active discussion about how much can we share. If you total up the 4 liberal arts colleges in the consortium, it's roughly 7,000 students. Now, there's no possible way we could or would want to merge all the support structure, because it's usually the infrastructure that needs to be, I don't think amortized is not the right word, but carried by the student. What we're talking about is that the smaller the institution, the greater the irreducible administrative costs per student are. That's sort of the concept here. But we could never do all of it, but I'm just thinking, again, talk about back of the envelope, is if we could arrange our support structures so that we all 4 of us, somehow had the efficiency of a school of 4,500 or 5,000. I mean, I don't know how you measure that, but let's say we could, by combining further of our support areas, we have some possibilities. Those are among the things. Mark, I'm pretty sure, will help us in the strategic plan figure out how any college could take on the issue of size, and whether we, already part of the consortium, our thank you. Public safety is already a trilateral agreement. I mean, we have one dispatch unit. And I just was hearing yesterday, this has given us this year about $100,000 in savings in our operating budget. What else could we do? Folks in the world of the libraries are actively talking about how they could work together on acquisitions and cataloging. So in a sense, how far can we go so that we've got the kind of service, front that we want, but gain economy of scales behind. So all those things have to be planned. Yes, please.
Hi, Ralph. I'm Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. And I just want to go back to something Myrna said about how, we're wondering what's going to happen next. And I wanted to say something that I think I'm becoming kind of annoying about, but it's that it would be great if employee or staff communications were approached strategically, and so that after a meeting like this, where a lot of us are not going to have a chance to talk, express our concerns, express our questions, etc., if we had some kind of systemic vehicle to communicate, to ask questions, to continue the conversation rather than just dropping it here. And I'm sure you probably all talked about this and have things in mind. But I just have yet to see a strategic approach to employee communications. That the strategic approach to external communications, fabulous and absolutely necessary. And the talking strategically with us is probably not as important, but I think it would help us through this.
I want to say it is important. And it's just one little line is that position will also help us on internal communications. I have to say that was a learning curve that I had, realizing how much of a separate challenge and how much intentionality is required in internal communications. I know that Shelley, I would love to hear some of Shelley's thoughts on that.